The next two topics that we're going to do, we're going to take 43 and 44 together. Article 43 is an article to vote to establish the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund and to appropriate funds for it. You can find that at page 73 in the warrant report. We have from Warrant Committee member Mike Pastore. Do you have a positive motion?
Yes, I do, Scott. Move that the town establish a stabilization fund to be designated, quote, the Municipal Buildings Capital Stabilization Fund, end quote, the sole purpose of which shall be to fund new construction, capital repairs and improvements to municipal buildings, and the structural and systemic components thereof. Quote, capital repairs and improvements, end quote, being defined as construction projects otherwise eligible for bonding pursuant to GL Chapter 44, Section 7, for a minimum of 5 years, as authorized by GL Chapter 40, Section 5B, and vote to appropriate $1 million to this fund, subject to voter approval of a dedicated override, pursuant to GL Chapter 59, Section 21C, Proposition 2.5 so-called, Paragraph G. Yep. This article would create a permanent funding source for the creation and maintenance of town buildings. A one-time allocation of $1 million would be initially made to the fund. If the fund is established, all future allocations into the fund are voted on by the Board of Selectmen, after which town meeting must vote to allocate those monies out to fund specific projects. The Warrant Committee views this fund as a tool for the town to maintain its many public buildings and therefore recommends passage.
Okay, we have a short presentation here from Mike Quinlan. Michael, introduce yourself and you can begin.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening. Mike Quinlan, 1 Stewart Street. I am the chair of the Medfield Permanent Building Committee, and I promise to be brief. My brain is a little fried. I'm sure yours is too. So the crux of the problem that we're facing is for years the town has neglected its facilities and regular maintenance over long periods of time. The buildings were always run by the departments, and as you can expect, department heads aren't necessarily set up to really maintain and keep their buildings up to snuff. It's not their fault. Librarians don't go to school to learn how to maintain buildings. So what we wanted to talk to you about tonight is how we solve this problem. And the first solution we had was we hired a director of facilities, Jerry McCarty, who's here tonight. And Jerry, I want to thank Jerry because Jerry started off by, in his own free time, essentially, putting together this document here, which I won't go through in all slides, I promise. This is an evaluation of every single municipal facility that the town maintains, with the exception of the newest buildings, the Department of Public Works and the Public Safety Building. Obviously, those being relatively new buildings, they don't require a ton of maintenance, and they're pretty much good to go for a little while. But this was his first draft through all of the existing facilities. So to give you a little background, the town has 12 major municipal buildings, 1 wastewater treatment plant, maintains over 700,000 square feet of space, which has an insured value of approximately $106 million. 8 of those 12 buildings are over 50 years old. And I should note that this also does not include miscellaneous historic structures like the Peak House, et cetera, or Medfield State Hospital. That's a whole different issue which will be resolved in the future, hopefully. So part of this plan is Jerry's evaluation over 20 years of the systems, the buildings, the facade, windows, doors, roofing, everything that makes up the building itself, and it all has a useful life. These are not costs that are optional. These are costs that are coming, whether we like it or not. This is also a working document. This is something that will be continually updated, and as things change, whether it be potentially for a new school building, et cetera, the asset that we have in, say, Dale Street, which is on the agenda for tonight, we would change exactly what we might invest in that building depending on its future use. So this is a working estimate. I should note that these numbers, while a little scary, and especially compared to that plus the OPEB issue, this is escalated to what we see as future inflation. So it's basically $1 today is not worth $1 in 20 years. So it's basically escalated to what we project a conservative amount for increase in construction costs and in materials, et cetera. So, but you can see over the next 5 years alone, we're seeing systems and repairs that are north of $29 million. What we're here tonight to do is not to solve the entire problem, but just to start to address it. One thing to note, actually I'll move this along. These are some of the projects that we've started to address since Jerry's come on board. And I want you to take a close look at these figures because it gives you a sense of the scale of what we as a town have invested our money into maintaining versus the numbers you saw on the previous slide. These are what we term immediate capital needs. These are urgent items that are significant. They're deficient in buildings. A large number of roofs are failing. And if anybody knows anything about buildings, the roof is probably the most important part as it keeps water out of the building, and water is the most destructive force when it comes to maintaining a building. So that gives you a sense of where we are. It gives you a sense of the problem. What we're asking for is to set up a a capital stabilization fund. What this does is this basically starts us with an allocation every year that goes towards just the maintenance of municipal facilities. That way, if budget constraints come on, and they come every year, this line item is dedicated just to that. It can't be, oh, we'll put that off for another year, which is how we've gotten into this problem in the past. But as a frame of reference, the Division of Capital Asset Management is the organization that this Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they operate all of the facilities that the Commonwealth owns. They project that a good number for a budget to maintain facilities is 2.5% of insured value. If we're estimating that our buildings have an estimated value of $106 million, right now we're spending $400,000 a year on capital maintenance. That's 0.37%. If we approve this article and we up that to $1 million a year, that gets us to 0.95%, which is still well below what the Commonwealth uses as a guideline. I just wanted to give you that as a frame of reference. This doesn't solve the whole problem. This is just the first step, but it's an important one. The benefit of doing this through a stabilization fund is it helps to eliminate the interest costs associated with borrowing funds as, say, an emergency arises, say a boiler fails, and we then have to do a major boiler replacement on one of the schools. We no longer have to borrow those funds on an emergency basis, as interest payments, etc. So we're not just paying for the cost of the repair, we're paying for the interest payments on top of that. This allows us to smooth that out a little bit. That's not to say there won't be things where we have to come back to the town and say we need new roofs, and it's more than $1 million, because that may happen. But at the very least, this helps to smooth out those payments. With that, I think Selectman Marcucci had some words as well.
Just very briefly on the financial piece of this. From an accountability standpoint, when we started looking at this, the assumption I think would be to fund this capital plan through sort of a series of debt exclusion votes over time. And if you look at the magnitude of it, we'd be coming back to the taxpayers on a fairly regular basis over the next 20 years. As Mike mentioned, we'd be exposed to the interest rate risk. We'd also be exposed to a problem with sort of odd lot numbers of repairs. The idea here is not to spend $1 million a year. Right? The idea is the fund will accumulate as needed. We will appropriate those funds. But if you have a $400,000 repair, it's hard for a town to borrow $400,000. It's a small bond issue. The fees are still pretty high. You know, if you've borrowed 400,000, the fees are similar if you're borrowing 10 million. We also didn't want to appropriate too much because we want to do this as prudently as possible. From a procedural standpoint, to spend this money, it's going to have to make it through the facilities director. Then, based on the bylaw we adopted last night, the Permanent Planning and Building Committee, who are expert in building issues, the Warrant Committee, the Selectmen, the Capital Budget Committee, the School Committee, and then a 2/3 vote of town meeting. So procedurally, this is a very tough dollar to spend, and it should be, right? We don't want to create a slush fund here if someone decides they want to paint their office a different color. This is to address immediate needs. As to the timing, this year with the Dale Street project, the first spending from this fund would be for the Dale Street feasibility study. That's, if you look at the number that we have up there, that's a huge chunk of this. And likely we'll be spending that money not to repair Dale Street, but to build a new building and to renovate it, depending on the outcome of the feasibility study. If we use that first $1 million, if we get a reimbursement from the state, that reimbursement goes back into the stabilization fund and can be reused in the future. And this, as Mike knows, most importantly, this takes this off the table from the perpetual thing we hear that it's a bad year, right? We've gotten here, you know, we like to say, to tout the fact that we haven't had an override in 7 years, and that's true. And we're certainly looking to make up for it this year. But the reality is, the reason we didn't have overrides is because we underfunded the capital, right? We used to say we're going to do $550,000. And then as you get through the negotiation, well, it's 500, then it's 450, and then you try to shave a little bit off that capital, and before you know it, you have numbers like this. And from a school building perspective, 80% of this is school buildings. They're the biggest buildings, they're the most trafficked buildings. You know, we're in the MSBA, the state program right now. The last time we were in it was 20 years ago. The likelihood of us getting another new school before 20 more years is unlikely. So we have to make these buildings last. We don't want to have to do these things on an emergency, last-minute basis. It's painful. It was very tempting to say, look, let's just do Dale Street versus Avon. It's cheaper in the short term. It's a bad year. But the reality is, if we don't fund it this year, the liability is still there, right? It's still going to be, the roof is still going to be there. The roof is not going to wait until we're ready to do this. And for these kind of permanent costs, the effect on the taxpayer is the same next year as it is this year. We've just waited another year. So as unpleasant as it is, we think that we got to rip the Band-Aid off now, get it over with, and then start to address this issue, which has accumulated over the course of decades, and it will be solved over the course of decades.
Okay, any other comments from the podium? From the stage? Okay, questions or comments? Okay, we're going to go to a vote. This is a vote to establish a municipal building stabilization fund and to appropriate the funds to it. Requires a 2/3 vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I'm going to deem that the motion carries by the required 2/3 vote. Number 44. Number 44 is a motion to appropriate funds and authorize borrowing for the Dale Street School feasibility study. You can find it on page 74 of the warrant report. Also requires a 2/3 vote, and warrant committee member Mike Pastore has a motion.
Move that the town appropriate $1 million to be expended under the direction of the School Building Committee for the purpose of paying costs of a feasibility study to review potential solutions to the problems identified in the Dale Street Elementary School Statement of Interest, including but not limited to obtaining soil borings, topographical studies, land surveys, wetland surveys, preliminary site development plans, schematic designs, architectural and engineering designs, cost estimates, and construction alternatives, and any incidental or related services for the addition and/or renovation to or replacement of the Dale Street Elementary School located at 45 Adams Street, Medfield, Mass. 02052, for which feasibility study the town of Medfield may be eligible for a grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, MSBA. Said amounts to be expended under the direction of the School Building Committee, and to meet this appropriation, the town transfer $1 million from the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund created under Article 43 of this 2018 annual town meeting warrant, subject to said stabilization fund being funded, provided that the amount authorized pursuant to this vote shall be reduced by any grant amount set forth in the feasibility study agreement. that may be executed between the Town of Medfield and the MSBA. The town acknowledges that the MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement, discretionary program based on need, as determined by the MSBA, and any costs the town incurs in excess of any grant approved by and received from the MSBA shall be the sole responsibility of the town.
Okay, that's the motion. Do you have a report?
This article would allocate funds from the stabilization fund we just created with passage of Article 43 for a feasibility study to review potential solutions to either repair the current Dale Street Elementary School building or construct a new building on the site to be determined. The verbiage of this article is mandated by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, which is the state granting authority that has approved the town for a state grant that will be covering roughly 40% of the overall project. The MSBA grant is contingent on completing certain prerequisites, which include such a feasibility study. Because the MSBA grant is contingent on providing this funding, the warrant committee recommends passage.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and Mr. Pastore, sorry about that. MSBA requires us to have that motion written like that, so that's quite the long motion. I want to just thank you for the opportunity this evening to speak in front of you. The members of the school building committee are up there. That is also pretty prescriptive from MSBA. They require certain positions to be a part of that school building authority. You need to have members of Board of Selectmen, town administrator, superintendent of schools, et cetera. So those are the folks that will be a part of that school building committee process. So we'll talk a little bit about how we got to this point tonight, what the MSBA process is, the feasibility study process, why is a new school needed, and next steps. So the statement of interest was submitted by the town of Medfield and the Medfield Public Schools in 2012, 2016, and 2017. In 2016, we completely revised the 2012, and we added some additional features to it. In 2017, we revised it once more and added the plan that Mr. Quinlan had just showed you that Jerry McCarty did. Certainly, we think that plan made a difference to MSBA. They came and conducted a site visit in August of this past year. So we knew we were getting close once they came to the site visit. They have never done that before. We took them to every nook and cranny of Dale Street, including the cellar, the basement, with all the wood, where all the wood is stored, and also the sandy floors. They got to see everything. We were accepted by MSBA into their program in December 2017. So we had to go into Boston to their meeting, and we were only one of 16 schools that were selected that day out of 84 SOIs. This gives you a sense of the timeline for Dale Street School. It opened 1941, so we're looking at, usually town buildings are built for 50 years. We're on year 77 for Dale Street. First edition happened in 1962, second edition 96. And this is a really important data point here. The first Dale Street study to look at developing a new school was in 2008. So this isn't something new that we just came up with. This is a 10-year project that we've been looking at as a town. First SOI, as we said, in 2012, second in 2016, third in 2017, and then we were just accepted into the eligibility period. So the MSBA is a fairly new. It's probably about 10 years old now. It's the old SBA. So when you folks did the high school and the middle school over many years ago, that was the SBA. Now we have the MSBA. So right now the reimbursement costs for Medfield, 38.84%. Sometimes I say 39%, but Mike Sullivan always corrects me and tells me that it's 38.84%. So that means that if we pass this evening, the town will get a reimbursement of $388,000. Now looking at the process, just to give you a timeline and what this is going to look like. So the eligibility period right now is April 2018 to the end of December. So we have until December to get the funds allocated. And then we start to form the project team in October and then into January of 2019. Mike?
So what you can see here, this is actually right off of the MSBA's website, which is very informative if you're looking for more information. We won't get into that level of detail tonight, but essentially everything noted in blue is for school districts, and the green is really construction professionals. And that's why the school building committee is made up of both building committee folks as well as the town administration, school administration, warrant committee, et cetera. So that's really part of the forming the project team. That's where we start to hybrid those different constituencies together. The eligibility period in forming the project team is the place where we are now. There is no guarantee that we get to the next step, but that's why we're here tonight. We have one of those steps in order to get to the feasibility study is appropriating the necessary funds. When we get into feasibility study, what we're really going to start off with is hiring what's called an owner's project manager to represent the town, architects, designers, et cetera. And then we're going to do a full feasibility study. That'll look at 4 main options: repair the building, renovate the building and add to the building, and then, 3 options: repair, renovate / add, and a new building. Those are the main options that we'll look at. And then if it's determined that the existing building doesn't support the educational needs and a new building is necessary, then we start looking at site evaluation. We start looking at all sorts of options in terms of where that would go. And then that gets us also into partially schematic design, which would get us to an approximate point where we figure we can get solid numbers for what the building would cost. Then we go back for another vote. We would come back to the town with hard numbers on what the project would cost, and we would put it in front of you. During this stage, we're really just looking at allocating the money to get to the next stage. That next stage of feasibility and schematic design is really where we get a lot of public input, and that's where we're going to have all sorts of visioning sessions and invite the community in to talk about what the community desires from this project. Subsequent to that, the funding the project would be, looks like about the year 2020, towards the 3rd quarter. And then if that gets approved, we would then go through construction documents and get the project completed on the design side. And then if the funding is approved, we move into construction, which estimates that we would, if everything goes smoothly, would open a new facility or an addition to the facility around the start of the school year in 2023. It's important to note this timeline, because a lot of this that factors into this is going to be a big ask. There's no doubt about that. But I want you to note the timeline, because the last time the town did major school projects with the 3 school projects of the middle school, high school, and Memorial was around the turn of the millennium. It started in the late 90s and wrapped up around 2004. A lot of the debt that the town took on in order to fund those projects start to come off the books. Right? They're borrowed usually on a 20-year process, on a 20-year bond. So starting around 2021, 22, some of that debt capacity starts to come back to the town. So it's not as if this is going to be all new borrowing and all new funding. There's going to be some balance off of some existing funding and payments, interest payments that will come off to help offset that. So I wanted to make sure we were clear on that.
So looking at some of the reasons why a new school is needed, our building certainly has limitations. Classroom sizes do not meet the MSBA standards. Certainly, I'll show you some pictures as we go through, but classrooms are a lot smaller than they should be. If you go into Memorial, you'll see nice, big, spacious classrooms for elementary kids. You don't see that in the Dale Street, smaller, cluttered classrooms. Our class size increase. We're starting to see an increase in our enrollment in the lower grades. We've had 104 kids move in, as I said last night, over the summer, new to Medfield. Many of those kids were in the elementary levels, so we've seen class sizes rise up to 24, 25 in some of our younger elementaries. And then we have numerous concerns with the American Disabilities Act, our ADA compliance in our school. We'll see some pictures a little bit later, but it's not compliant. It's not made for 2018. Certainly the ADA has changed over the years, and it's not accessible for all of our students and for folks that visit as well. Gives you a sense of what the current classroom space looks like. Go through these quickly. The picture in the middle is something that's important to note. So, you know, music is a big part of our culture here at Medfield, and lessons begin at the Dale Street level in 4th grade. And what you see when you go into Dale Street during the day is most of our lessons and practices are happening in the hallways or the vestibule in the main building. We don't have a dedicated space for music lessons. That's a problem for us. Some of the general space, you see the nurse's office, really undersized, teacher's room, and one of the bathrooms. This is an interesting one. So we have lots of storage issues at Dale Street. That first picture that you see, that's what the teachers go to get their papers printed. They have to go into that storage closet. It's a network printer, so they have to navigate their way around that. Certainly the storage in the middle isn't great. And then, as I said, music is important to us, and we have no place to store the instruments. So we have to put those in the hallways. And if you go there on a Monday or Tuesday when there's ensemble practice, it's really crowded in that hallway. So here's a sense of what our enrollment looks like. So we have, every couple of years, we have NESDEC who does enrollment projections for over 400 school districts in New England. They did the last one in 2017, 2018. And if you see right now, the 2018 numbers were already above what the projections were. So every year when NESDEC, every couple of years when they do this, they tell us there are 3 communities that always have large student ratios, where families are moving into because they're moving into the schools. Hopkinton, Medfield, and Sudbury are always the 3 communities. So this doesn't take in consideration any of the new development, whether it's Hospital Hill or any of the 40Bs that they're talking about by Dale Street. So that's just, they use a live birth cohort model, so that's based on folks that are here or people that have moved in. But you'll see that in 2027, we're right back up to, projected up to right around 3,000 students again. Another picture of the storage on the left, and you'll see the hallway on the far right. You know, that, if you've ever been in Dale Street recently, you'll see how small those lockers are. Elementary schools have cubbies now where kids put their materials and put their coats. This was built in '41 as a high school, so it's set up like a high school, and it's probably the most narrow lockers I've ever seen in my entire life. On a recent tour, someone mentioned they must have done that in the '40s so no one could stuff someone in the locker. I don't know why they did it, but they're pretty narrow. Here's some of our ADA issues. You'll see they're no longer compliant. The picture in the middle is a lift. So there's no access to the second floor. That lift just gets you up to the second level, but the actual second floor, there's no access to that in our school.
It's interesting to note that the American with Disabilities Act is not just for people with handicap. We have a lot of children that play sports, injure their ankles, legs. When that happens, it makes it very difficult on the school to be able to respond because they can't get some of those kids up to some of those upper levels. So it's not just for wheelchair-bound children. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Some of the major systems that are failing right now and will continue to fail mainly are HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Control valves and how we control those systems.
Michael, I think we could stipulate that we have an old and antiquated building at Dale Street, right? I think there's no one that has a disagreement with that, right? So,
no problem. So just
more
flip
pictures.
it through. You can see the problems.
It's very old.
But we do want to do one more slide, if you can bear with me. Next steps. We'll vote the article tonight. If it's approved tonight, there is a town election override vote for June 11th, and visioning sessions would start in the fall. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Okay, questions or comments at microphone number 1 or 2? Microphone number 1.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Round 2. It's been a good one. My name's Randy Dysinger at 43 Park Street. And for the last 26 years that I can remember, that's all I've been hearing about is Medfield schools. Thrilled. I now have them in there. My kindergartner's reading to me at night. That's awesome. But why do we have 5 schools? And from the slide presentation beforehand, are any of them ADA compliant? Is this one?
I don't know, to be honest, I can't respond
What?
to that question, but
Reason-
it's a lot closer than Dale Street,
I
I'll tell you
mean,
that much.
I know we want to start with Dale Street, but here's my thought. A lot of hot topics tonight and tomorrow night. I mean, tonight and last night.
Get me Stewart.
All right. Let me get going here. All right, we have the state hospital land. We're looking for things for revenue for the town. I say, let's do the smart thing and think about putting schools one at a time up there. Taking this old schools, we could do housing with them, we can make some money that way, but let's start with fresh schools on one thing. So we're not driving around all over town. Why are schools all over town? Because that's the way Medfield started, 1940, 1910, whatever it was. I think the smart thing to do is to not do anything until we can come up with $1 million plan to bring them up to the school, bring them up to the hospital.
Good.
Thank you for
Thank
listening
you.
to me. Thank you.
Comments? Any other comments, questions? Okay, if there are none, we're going to put this to a vote. This is a motion read by Mr. Pastore. Appropriate funds and authorize borrowing for the Dale Street School feasibility study. To transfer into the new stabilization fund. Thank you. Does require a 2/3 vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? I deem that the motion carries by the required 2/3.